Good morning. We're quite a cozy group this morning. I'm going to continue talking about the Heart Sutra, and the lines we'll be talking about today are no suffering, no cause of suffering, no extinguishing, no path. And these, if you recognize them, are the Four Noble Truths, except they're negated. And they were expounded by Shakyamuni Buddha in his first teaching. So the Four Noble Truths state that life is dukkha, which is translated as suffering. And the second Noble Truth declares that there's a cause for this suffering. And the third Noble Truth is that one can put an end to the suffering or extinguish suffering. And then the fourth Noble Truth expounds the Eightfold Path, which are the means to extinguish suffering. So the Heart Sutra says there's no suffering, there's no cause of suffering, which is this relating to the second Noble Truth, and then the no extinguishing, so there's no extinguishing of suffering, and then there's no path that leads to the extinguishing of suffering. So the Heart Sutra seems to be negating that teaching, but if we look at it more closely, what it actually implies is a radical affirmation. What is negated is our ideas and opinions, not the activity itself. When I let go of my ideas about an action, I'm not separate from that action. And it becomes right action, which is one of the Eightfold Path. So if we look directly at the first one where it says no suffering, if we listen carefully to the Heart Sutra where it says Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva doing deep Prajna Paramita, then there's no suffering. Because we're so identified, we're so united, we're not separate at all from the suffering. So everything becomes that suffering. And when everything becomes that suffering, then there's no suffering. And the reason that we suffer is that everything is changing and impermanent. And we seek permanence, whether it be an ego, a fixed self, ultimate truth, trying to find the primordial elementary particle. So we're bound to suffer because we're constantly disappointed that things don't go the way we want them. There's all kinds of causes of suffering. Wanting to have something and not having it is a cause of suffering. And then you can flip it around. Having something we don't want is the cause of suffering too. No. Not being able to be with somebody that we want to be with, cause of suffering. Being with somebody we don't want to be with, cause of suffering. So the Buddha recognized 6 realms of existence or psychological states. And of course, one of them is the human realm. And when we become angry, we become demons or fighting spirits. And when we're greedy, we become hungry ghosts. And when we're tormented, we reside in the realm of hell. And when we're lazy and happy and complacent, we reside in the realm of heaven. And when we're indifferent to the suffering in the world, we're like an animal. So we think that we're in the human realm. And I've heard that only from the human realm can one attain Buddhahood. That may be true, but the human realm also has its difficulties. So the human realm is characterized by conceptual interpretation of each moment. And as things change, we try to conceptualize them. And so we're stuck in a world of delusion, not seeing things clearly. But since it's all one body, we can freely transmigrate between the 6 realms of existence. And it's only when we get attached to one thing or another that we suffer. Like it says in affirming faith or affirming trust and heart mind, the perfect way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose, for those who are not attached to their choices, as things are always shifting. So most of our suffering is ego grasping suffering, and it's fundamentally neurotic. And we can make a distinction between that and selfless suffering. Egocentric suffering causes us to contract, and become inactive or defensive or mean. And we'll do whatever is necessary to preserve and protect our cherished beliefs of who we are and how things should be. So it's a very contracted state. It's not very expansive because it's denying the reality of things. So if we're able to experience no self, pain and suffering do not suddenly disappear. However, if we're able to totally experience the pain without judgments, without stories, and if we're able to totally experience the suffering without judgments and stories, there's no separation, then there's no subject who suffers. And there's no object that is suffered. In that sense, the suffering is gone, so there's no suffering. There's a section of the Diamond Sutra that relates to this that we have as a koan in our collections. And it says, if someone is reviled by others, that person has acquired bad karma in the previous existence. Because of this falling into evil ways, so that he is reviled by people in this life, the bad karma of the previous existence will be exhausted. So just being reviled by others does not exhaust bad karma. You have to allow that hatred to penetrate your entire body and mind. So you can test this in the laboratory of your life. So if the same situation keeps coming up over and over for you, or you have the same response to situations in your life, or things are not happening according to your expectations, for example, it's due to a strategy that you develop to protect your self-image. Consequently, you suffer. The strategies we develop are usually early in life. So the only way to get out of this unending loop is to advance towards the suffering and the pain and to experience it totally. Not to think about it, but to experience it. Then you won't have to be afraid of it. Chunks of your ego-grasping ignorance will drop away and your life will become more expansive. Roshi Shishin Wick put together this book, The Great Heart Way, to look at ways to deal with this perpetual suffering that we feel in our life. Maybe some of you have good examples that you can think about. Well, the one example I had in the book was, no matter what success I had, was always not feeling good enough. And I didn't know where it came from. I always had to excel at everything I did. I did well in school, I did well in sports. I had good relationships. I even became a successor to my Zumi Roshi, and I still had that nagging feeling it wasn't good enough. Those of you who read the book know that just sitting with that feeling, it was a feeling of my body, of not feeling complete, not feeling adequate. And I traced it all the way back to when I was in religious school, when I was very young. And when Abraham was commanded by God to sacrifice his son. And then at the last moment, of course, a ram was caught in a bush, and the Lord saw that Abraham was going to go through with it, that he really was a servant of God, but he said that he would spare his son. And he could sacrifice the ram instead. And I thought, wow, Isaac, here he is, a good boy, obedient, and they're going to kill him. What are they going to do with somebody like me? Who wasn't obedient and was a rascal. I realized that I have to be perfect, man. Can't give him any cause to kill me. So when I finally got in touch with that feeling, I was able to release it. So, every day is a good day. Yeah. That got me thinking out, this is an aside, but that's quite a story in the Bible, And all the books that are being banned, in libraries. You look at the Bible, there's some really horrific stuff in there. Yeah. And the Bible is actually the authority that's used to ban some of these books. It's kind of ironic. So the Eightfold Path, the Buddha said, is a way to end suffering, but according to the Heart Sutra, there's no path. But let's look at it a little more carefully. So what is the Eightfold Path? It's right view or understanding, right thought, right words or speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration or samadhi. So if we pay constant attention to our thoughts and speech and actions and how we're seeing things, carefully examine it, and our livelihood and effort, how much effort we're putting in, and are we putting it in the right way? Years ago, I met Soen Nakagawa Roshi, who was one of the pioneers bringing Zen to this country. And just in a conversation with him, I said I was trying my best with my practice. And he looked at me, and I mentioned this before. He said, try. And afterwards I thought, of course, if I don't try, how am I going to make any progress? And then he'd probably say, progress? Progress. So, and then later I was reading when Suzuki Roshi's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, came out. I read in there, he said that the best kind of effort to make is to let go of whatever's not necessary. In other words, don't carry around things that you don't need. That's right effort, and I've used that definition ever since. It's not making effort to try to accumulate things, but try to let go of things. That's what the Buddha said, that he didn't accumulate anything in his practice, but he did let go of a lot of things. So it's interesting that the translation we have is right view, right thought, right speech, right conduct, and so forth. But right has an implication of dualism, that there's right versus wrong. But right, in this case, means to eliminate all concepts of duality. If you want to have the right view, you have to let go. And that's what the Heart Sutra says over and over and over again. No eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, so forth. No suffering, no cause, no extinguishing, no path. Back in the around 1970, I was living in London, and I met Sochu Suzuki Roshi, who effectively was my first Zen teacher. And London is it's not socialist, but it's this has socialist tendencies. It's a socialist democracy. And there was a young man sitting with us, and he was on the dole. He was doing everything he could for the government to support him and not have to work. And he carried it so far, and finally he was forced to get a job, and he got a job in a butcher shop. and he was cutting and packaging meat. And shortly thereafter, he went to Sochi Roshi, and he said, since cutting meat is not right livelihood, I should quit my job, right? And he was asking Sochi Roshi to say that it was against his religion to have that job. Sochi Roshi didn't speak very good English, but he understood what was going on. And he looked at the young man and he said, very nice. Chop, chop, chop. Very nice. Very nice. No separation, just chop, chop, chop. Well, of course, a lot of Buddhists are vegetarian, but as you know, the Buddha begged for all of his food and he ate everything, whatever they put in the bowl. He was eventually died, I think, from some contaminated pork. It's one thing that I read. But this eightfold path sets forth 8 different paths of letting go. So as far as right speech, the Buddha said on his deathbed after 50 years, I have not uttered a single word. So he spoke without speaking, without using his tongue and lips, speaking with a whole being, just speaking without putting up filters to preserve a self-image. So if you look at each path, it's like that, each of the eightfold paths. So when we say life is suffering, that's another idea. Life is life. You can add all kinds of things to it, but then what is it? That's the way we talk about life, but by stating no suffering, the Heart Sutra is affirming life. And let's not take no suffering as another idea. Let me read a quote of Bankei, who was a Japanese Zen master about the 17th century. He said, as you've all heard me say, everyone has an innate Buddha mind. So all you need to do is abide in the unborn, just as it is. However, following the ways of the world, you get into bad habits in life and switch the Buddha mind for the wretched realm of hungry ghosts with its clinging and craving. Grasp this thoroughly, and you will always abide in the unborn Buddha mind. But if you wish to realize the unborn, you have to try to stop your thoughts of clinging and craving from arising. And then by stopping them, you divide one mind into 2, as if you're pursuing something that's running away. As long as you try to deliberately stop your rising mind, the thought of trying to stop them wars against the continually arising thoughts themselves. There's never an end to it. So he has this example. He said it's like washing away blood with blood. Of course, you might get out the original blood, but the blood after that would stick, and the red would never go away. So he says, the original clinging thought that you were trying to stop may have an end, but the subsequent thoughts concerned with your stopping them will never cease. Well, you might wonder, what then am I supposed to do to stop them? He said, even if suddenly, despite yourselves and wholly unaware, rage and anger should appear, thoughts of clinging and craving arise, just let them come. Don't develop them any further. Don't attach to them without concerning yourself about whether to stop your rising thoughts or not to stop them. Just don't bother with them. And then there's nothing else they can do but stop. You can't have an argument with a fence. When there's no one there to fight with, things can't help but simply come to an end of themselves. So he's talking about thoughts, but the same thing is true with suffering. Like, one of the most difficult places to practice is in relationships, particularly if people are pushing against each other, right? But if one of you decides not to push, and there's all this space, the other one doesn't have anything to lean against. So it's just all this space. That's what he's talking about. Give it space. Don't engage it. Just return to your breath. Don't resolve it. Don't fix it. And see what happens. So that's what the Heart Sutra is saying. No suffering. No cause. No extinguishing, and no path.